You haven't subscribed to the channel yet? Subscribe now. We have new stories every day. Now let's go. Her affair ended with my fist and I wasn't sorry. It was one of those upscale affairs, smooth jazz playing softly in the background, champagne flutes clinking, and the air heavy with the scent of expensive cologne. The night was young, but the heat from the bodies packed into the room already made the grand living room feel warmer than it should. My wife Jenna looked stunning in that red dress, a little too stunning perhaps. The way it clung to her curves, the way her eyes sparkled. Something felt different. Of course, it wasn't the first time I'd noticed how the room seemed to light up when she walked in, but tonight was different. Maybe it was her laugh, a little louder than usual, or the way she was holding her champagne flute with just enough grace to seem innocent. I noticed her glancing across the room, and my gut tightened as my eyes followed hers. There he was, Ryan, her coworker. Tall, charming, with that chiseled jawline that had every woman at the office fawning over him. They'd worked together for years, and I'd heard all about him. Every compliment, every little story about what a great guy he was. Yeah, sure, great guy. But tonight, Jenna wasn't just talking about him. She was absorbed by him. At first, I didn't think much of it. They were standing by the grand piano, and from where I stood, laughing with some old college buddies, it looked harmless enough. I told myself it was nothing. But as the night wore on, I couldn't ignore it. The way her hand would linger on his arm just a little too long, or how she'd throw her head back in laughter every time he spoke. She was enchanted. That much was clear. I chuckled more to myself than to my friends. Of course it was innocent. It had to be. I was overthinking things. I forced myself to stay engaged in a conversation, nodding along to some story that I didn't give a damn about, but my mind kept wandering back to Jenna and Ryan. I could see the way he looked at her, like a predator watching its prey. I shook my head trying to clear it. She'd been with me for 10 years. She wasn't that kind of woman, right? As the night continued, I made my rounds, but every time I glanced over, there they were still deep in conversation, a bit too close. Then I heard it, the words that made my blood run cold. "He's such a good man," she said. It was meant to be an innocent comment, but the way she said it, the admiration dripping from her voice. No, this was something else. My grip on my glass tightened. I decided I needed some air. I excused myself from my friends, making my way across the room to the bathroom, but not before glancing at her once more. She didn't even notice me leave, too busy with Ryan. I pushed the door open to the hallway, the sound of the party growing distant as I walked. My head was pounding. Such a good man. I replayed the words in my head, the way her voice softened when she said them. I needed to get it together. Maybe I was just being paranoid. Maybe it was just the champagne messing with my head. But then, just as I approached the bathroom, I heard something. Low voices, familiar voices. Jenna's laugh. Not the one I knew. The genuine one that warmed my heart, but a different kind. Playful, flirtatious. My pulse quickened, and I followed the sound around the corner to a secluded part of the hallway. There they were. I stood frozen, my hand gripping the doorframe so hard my knuckles turned white. Ryan had her pinned gently against the wall, his lips brushing hers. The look in her eyes. God, the way she looked at him. It wasn't confusion or surprise. It was desire. She wanted it. Something snapped inside me. Before I could even process what I was doing, I stormed down the hallway at the sound of my footsteps, alerting them. Ryan barely had time to pull back before I was on him. My fist connected with his jaw, sending him crashing into the wall. "Get your hands off my wife," I growled, my voice colder than I thought possible. Ryan staggered, holding his jaw, eyes wide in shock. Jenna gasped, scrambling to compose herself. "It's not what it looks like," she stammered, reaching out to me, but I wasn't listening. I grabbed Ryan by the collar, yanking him to his feet. I said, "Get the hell out." My voice was low, controlled, but I could feel the fury boiling just beneath the surface. He didn't need to be told twice. He stumbled down the hallway, not even bothering to pick up his jacket, muttering something about how it was a mistake. Yeah, damn right it was a mistake. I turned to Jenna, still trembling, her face pale, tears welling up in her eyes. She opened her mouth to speak, but I held up a hand. "Don't. Not here. Not now." The party was still going on in the next room, oblivious to the explosion that had just taken place in the shadows of that quiet hallway. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to keep it together, but inside I was already plotting. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. The thing about betrayal is that it doesn't just break you, it changes you. And now it was my turn. We didn't speak as we left the party. The car ride home was suffocatingly silent, the tension thick enough to choke on. I kept my eyes on the road, gripping the steering wheel tighter than I should have, trying to calm the storm raging inside me. Jenna sat beside me, her hands nervously twisting the edge of her dress, her gaze fixed out the window. She hadn't even tried to explain herself, not really. What could she say? My mind was racing, the image of her with Ryan pinned against the wall, their lips so close, playing on repeat in my head, gnawing at my insides. Every glance she threw his way, every laugh. He's such a good man, I laughed bitterly to myself. The kind of man who steals another's wife. Perfect. I thought about pulling over, confronting her right there on the side of the road, forcing her to explain, to give me something, anything. But I wasn't ready to hear her excuses. Not yet. I needed time. Time to process, to plan, to figure out exactly how I was going to handle this. Because this wasn't something you just forgive and forget. No, this required something more deliberate. We pulled into the driveway, the headlights casting long shadows against the house we built together. Funny, I once loved this place. Now it felt like a prison. I turned off the engine but didn't move. Jenna shifted uncomfortably in her seat, waiting for me to say something, to make the first move. Finally, she spoke, her voice trembling. I'm sorry. I let the words hang in the air for a moment, their weight heavy and meaningless. Sorry. That's all she had to say after what I'd just seen. Sorry, I echoed, still staring straight ahead, my voice cold and detached. That's what you've got. She swallowed hard, her eyes pleading. It didn't mean anything, I swear. It was just, I don't even know what I was thinking. It was stupid. Stupid. I cut her off, finally turning to face her. Right, so tell me, Jenna, at what point did it become stupid? Was it when you were laughing at his jokes when you touched his arm, or maybe it was when you let him kiss you? My voice grew sharper with every word, the anger bubbling up again, threatening to spill over. Tears welled up in her eyes. Good. She should cry. She should feel every bit of pain she had just inflicted on me. It was a mistake, she whispered, her voice breaking. I never wanted to hurt you. I love you. Love. Now that was rich. Funny way of showing it, I said, my tone dripping with sarcasm. Is that how you treat someone you love? By getting cozy with your coworker at a party? By letting him, what, make you feel special? She flinched at my words, but I didn't care. He deserved it. Every ounce of guilt, every tear, every moment of shame. She deserved it all. I don't know what happened, she continued, her voice barely audible. I wasn't thinking. He. Don't, I snapped, cutting her off again. Don't you dare try to put this on him. He may be a piece of garbage, but you're the one who let it happen. You're the one who betrayed me. I could see the guilt written all over her face, the way she couldn't meet my eyes. She knew. She knew exactly what she had done, but that didn't make it any better. It didn't make it hurt any less. For a long moment, neither of us said anything. The silence was deafening, punctuated only by the sound of our breathing. I could feel the rage simmering just beneath the surface, but I forced it down. Not yet. I couldn't afford to lose control, not now. There was too much at stake. Finally, I spoke, my voice low and steady. We're not talking about this tonight. She blinked, confused. What? I turned to face her, my expression cold and calculating. You heard me. We're not talking about this tonight. Go inside, get some sleep. We'll deal with it tomorrow. Her face crumpled, the tears threatening to spill over, but my tone was final, leaving no room for argument. I'm not ready to have this conversation, and honestly, you don't want to have it with me right now. Trust me. She hesitated, torn between wanting to explain and fearing what would come next. But she must have seen something in my eyes, something that told her pushing me wasn't the right move. So she nodded, wiping at her tears as she reached for the door handle. As she got out of the car, I watched her walk toward the house, her steps slow and hesitant. For a moment, I felt a flicker of something, pity maybe, but it was gone as quickly as it came, replaced by that cold, gnawing anger. She had chosen this. She had made her bed, and now she was going to lie in it. I stayed in the car for a while longer, staring out at the dark, empty street. The quiet night did nothing to calm the storm inside of me. I knew what I had to do. This wasn't going to end with a simple conversation or a few tears and apologies. No, this was going to be different. She thought she could play me for a fool, that she could cry her way out of this. But what she didn't realize was that I wasn't the same man she thought she knew. She had no idea what she had just set in motion. I took a deep breath, my mind already working, already planning. This wasn't about revenge, at least not in the way most people thought of it. It wasn't about yelling or throwing things or even storming out. No, this was going to be far more methodical, far more controlled. I smiled to myself, a cold, bitter smile. Let the games begin. The next morning, the house was suffocatingly quiet. Jenna tiptoed around like a shadow, trying not to disturb the invisible storm she knew was brewing. I could feel her eyes on me, stealing glances as I sat at the kitchen table with my coffee, flipping through the paper as if nothing had happened, as if her betrayal wasn't hanging over us like a black cloud, ready to burst. I wasn't ready to confront her. Not yet. No, I had to be smart about this. Careful. She didn't need to know how deep the knife had cut, or that I was already thinking about my next move. The worst thing I could do now was let her see me angry, let her think she had any control over the situation, because control in the end is all that mattered. As she passed by, pretending to busy herself with mundane tasks, straightening the cushions, wiping an already clean countertop, I could feel the tension radiating off her. She was waiting for me to snap, for the inevitable explosion that would follow a night like last night, but I wasn't going to give her the satisfaction. Not yet. Do you want some breakfast? She asked, her voice tentative, fragile. I even look up from the paper. No. There was a long pause, the air thick with unspoken words. She stood there, probably hoping I'd say something more, hoping we could have the talk that she thought would fix everything. But I wasn't interested in talking. Not yet. I'm so sorry. You know, she whispered. I didn't mean for. I set the paper down and looked at her, just looked, and that was enough. Her words trailed off, her face crumpling under the weight of my silent stare. I didn't need to raise my voice. I didn't need to yell or scream. Silence to be louder than anything when used properly. Finally, she broke. I know I messed up, okay. I know what I did was wrong, but I love you. You have to believe that. I leaned back in my chair, folding my arms across my chest, watching her squirm. Do I? I asked, my voice calm and detached. Do I have to believe that? Her eyes filled with tears again, but I didn't care. I wasn't interested in her tears. Not anymore. I could see the desperation on her face, the way her hands trembled as she clutched the edge of the counter, looking for something, anything, that would make me relent. You have no idea what this feels like, she sobbed. I didn't mean for any of it to happen. There it was again, her trying to turn this into something that just happened, like she was some passive passenger in her own betrayal, like she hadn't been making choices like she hadn't wanted it. I stood up slowly, taking my time, letting the tension build. No, Jenna, I said softly, stepping closer. You didn't mean for me to find out. That's what you're really sorry about. She opened her mouth to protest, but I cut her off with a cold smile. But don't worry, I believe you. I believe you when you say you love me. It's just a shame that love wasn't enough to keep you from exploring other options. Her face twisted with guilt, and she took a step toward me, as if that would make a difference. It was a mistake. It was just one moment of weakness, and it meant nothing. Stop, I said, my voice low but firm. You've said enough. I watched her crumble under the weight of my indifference. This wasn't about hearing her excuses. It wasn't even about finding out why she did it. It was about watching her fall apart piece by piece. And she was falling apart. I could see it in the way her shoulders slumped, the way she bit her lip, trying to hold back the flood of emotions. She wasn't used to this version of me, the calm, detached me, the one who wasn't yelling, wasn't losing his mind. She didn't know how to deal with it, and that's exactly what I wanted. You think this is over? I said, stepping even closer, my voice barely above a whisper. You think we're just going to sit down, have a talk, and move on from this, don't you? She looked up at me, her eyes wide, hopeful. I just want us to fix this, please. We can get through this. I know we can. I shook my head, chuckling darkly. Oh, Jenna, we're not going to fix this. There's no fixing what you've done. I paused, letting the silence fill the room again. But don't worry, I'm not leaving. That would be too easy for you. No, we're going to stay right here together, and you're going to learn what it feels like to live with the consequences of your actions. Her face went pale as the meaning behind my words sunk in. What? What do you mean? I smiled coldly. You'll find out. I turned and walked past her, leaving her standing there, trembling, tears streaming down her face. I wasn't done with her, not by a long shot. But she needed to sit with this, to stew in her guilt and her shame. She needed to feel the weight of what she had done, and I was going to make damn sure she did. The next few days were a masterclass in silent punishment. I didn't yell, didn't raise my voice, didn't even argue. I just let her exist in the tension, in the unspoken understanding that things would never be the same again. Every time she tried to talk, I would nod, maybe give a short answer, and go back to whatever I was doing, leaving her to drown in her own guilt. It was beautiful, in a way, watching her unravel, watching her try so desperately to reach me, only to be met with cold indifference. She would cry herself to sleep, thinking I didn't hear her. But I did. I heard every tear, every sniffle, and each one felt like a small victory. But this was only the beginning. See, I wasn't just going to let her wallow in guilt and shame. No, that wasn't enough. I needed her to pay for what she had done, and not just emotionally. I needed her to feel the consequences in every aspect of her life. Slowly, methodically, I started making moves. Her phone. I can touch it, but I didn't need to. I knew her passcode. I'd known it for years. It wasn't hard to log into her social media accounts, her email. She'd find out soon enough that things weren't going to be as easy as she thought, but that was just the start. There were other, more subtle ways to make her suffer, ways she wouldn't even notice at first. Changing little things in the house, hiding small items she used daily, making her question her sanity bit by bit. Gaslighting? Maybe, but when it's deserved, it feels more like justice. And Ryan, oh, I hadn't forgotten about him. He would get his turn too. But for now, Jenna was my focus. She was the one who needed to learn her lesson, and she would. I would make sure of it. The following morning, the air was thick with the kind of tension that makes your skin crawl. Jenna moved around the house like a ghost, her eyes puffy from crying, her movements slow and unsure. She was waiting for something, for me to make a decision, to tell her where we stood. What she didn't realize was that I'd already made up my mind. Today, everything changed. I watched her from the kitchen as she quietly packed up her things for work. Her phone buzzed on the counter, probably Ryan again, still desperate for a conversation. He didn't matter anymore, not in the way Jenna thought. Anyway, I dealt with that mentally. Now it was her turn to feel the consequences of what she'd done. After she finally left the house, I got to work. First, I called my lawyer. Divorce. It felt cold and final just thinking the word, but the wheels had already been set in motion. Jenna had made her choices, and now I was making mine. My lawyer, a sharp guy I'd known for years, picked up immediately. It's time, I said simply. There was no need for explanation. He knew what this call meant. I'll start the paperwork and file today. Do you need any advice about the situation at home? He asked. I thought about it for a moment, my eyes flicking to the front door where Jenna had just left. No, I replied. I got it handled. After hanging up, I stood there for a moment, letting the reality settle in. This was it. There would be no going back, no second chances. The end of our life together was coming, and there was nothing she could do about it. I had control now, and I wasn't about to let her escape the consequences. By the time Jenna returned that evening, the house was eerily quiet. She opened the front door, stepping in hesitantly like she knew something was coming, but couldn't quite put her finger on it. Her eyes flickered toward me, sitting in the living room, watching her from the couch. I didn't say a word. I just let her stand there in the doorway, clutching her purse, waiting for me to speak. She knew it was coming whenever it was, and the silence only made her more nervous. Can we talk? She asked softly, her voice barely above a whisper. I stood up slowly, taking my time, walking past her toward the front door. She turned confused, watching me as I unlocked the door and swung it open wide. Get out, I said coldly. Her eyes widened, confusion giving way to panic. What? She took a step forward as if she hadn't heard me correctly. Wait, what are you? You heard me. I cut her off, my voice sharp and unwavering. Get out of this house. Tears instantly welled up in her eyes. You don't mean that, she pleaded, shaking her head in disbelief. Please, we can work through this. We can. There's no we anymore, Jenna. I stepped closer, my voice lowering to a dangerous calm. You had your chance. You made your choice, and now I'm making mine. I want you out. Now. Her face crumpled, the reality hitting her all at once. She opened her mouth to protest, but nothing came out. She just stood there shaking, tears streaming down her face. Where am I supposed to go? She whispered, her voice breaking. I shrugged, completely detached. Not my problem. Go to Ryan for all I care. Maybe he has room for you. She flinched at the mention of his name, her tears falling harder now. Please, she begged, her voice trembling. Don't do this. I'm sorry. I'll do anything. You're right. I cut her off again. You're sorry, but it's too late for that. The coldness in my voice seemed to knock the wind out of her. She took a shaky step backward, her eyes wide with shock and disbelief. She looked around the house, the place we'd shared for years, as if she couldn't believe what was happening. But it didn't matter. None of it mattered anymore. I've already filed for divorce, I said, my voice steady. You'll get the papers soon. I suggest you find a lawyer. The color drained from her face, her hand flying to her mouth as if she'd been physically hit. No, she whispered, shaking her head violently. No, you can't. We can fix this. We can go to counseling. We can. There's nothing to fix, I said, coldly stepping toward her. You broke this, Jenna. You shattered everything. Now you will live with the consequences. Her knees buckled, and she collapsed into the nearest chair, her hands covering her face as she sobbed uncontrollably. But I didn't feel sorry for her, not even a little. She deserved every tear, every moment of despair. For a moment, I considered helping her up, telling her to calm down. But then I remembered the way she had kissed Ryan at that party, the way her eyes had sparkled with excitement when she thought I wasn't looking. That image played in my mind, fueling the fire inside me. I want you out by tomorrow, I said, my voice cold and final. Take whatever you need, but don't think about coming back. This house, it's mine now. Her sobs grew louder, but I was done listening. I turned and walked away, leaving her in a crumpled heap on the chair. She could cry all she wanted, but it wouldn't change a thing. I had made up my mind, and there was no going back. By the time I made it upstairs, I heard the sound of her packing, a frantic, desperate shuffling of clothes and belongings. She wasn't going to fight me. She knew she'd lost. That night, the house was blissfully quiet. No more tearful apologies, no more begging, no more guilt, just peace. I poured myself a drink, sitting on the couch, letting the cool burn of whiskey soothe me. The papers were in motion, and soon she would be out of my life for good. I stared at the empty space where her keys used to hang, feeling a strange sense of relief wash over me. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I was back in control. I had my life back. I had my dignity. And as for Jenna, she was nothing more than a memory now, a mistake I'd learned from, but one I would never make again. I sipped my whiskey, the faint sound of her leaving the house behind me like a final punctuation mark. The door clicked shut, and I was alone. exactly where I wanted to be.